The next speaker is Dr. Timothy Miller. Tim is currently the David Clausen Professor of Neurology at the School of Medicine in Washington University in St. Louis. And he has been very actively involved in the development of antisense oligonucleotides for a variety of neurodegenerative diseases, but in particular ALS and the tauopathies. Tim has pioneered these ASOs and in 2018 received the Sheila Essay Award for his contribution to ALS research. He's also more recently in 2019 received the Healy Award. We have asked Tim to review for us today the top line results from the Valor study, and I'm expecting many questions once Tim is completed. So Tim, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, very good. I'm just doing a quick mic check. Delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation to talk about these results. Mentioned these results are the same results that I've presented at the ANA meeting in October. And these slides, or something very, very close to these slides, is available at the Biogen website. If you can't find them, please contact me. I'm happy to point you in that direction. Okay, so these are results from the phase 3 Valor study. This is a study of Tofersen, an antisense oligonucleotide that lowers SOD1 in participants with SOD1-related ALS. Some disclosures. I serve on an advisory board and receive clinical research support from Biogen, and with Ionis Pharmaceuticals have a licensing agreement and a consulting agreement. You can see my other disclosures there. The study is sponsored by Biogen, which is why I call out that one, and the antisense oligonucleotides used here were developed by Ionis Pharmaceuticals, which is why I called out the second one. I think for this audience, this slide needs relatively little review. SOD1 mutations cause ALS, about 2%, 1% to 2% of all ALS. Mutant SOD1 causes leads to misfolding and likely interferes with multiple processes. And evidence indicates that the toxicity is from a gain of function mechanism. And so lowering SOD1 with Tofersen, an intrathecally administered antisense oligonucleotide, has the potential to slow down disease. The design of this study was 100 milligrams of Tofersen compared to placebo, 2-to-1 randomization, and then there's an open label extension. It'll be those data from open label I think will be important to show you today. These are for adults with weakness attributable to ALS and an SOD1 mutation. The primary endpoint is the ALS functional rating scale. Some of the secondary endpoints are breathing, slow vital capacity, strength, handheld dynamometry, and then time to events such as death or permanent ventilation. Other key secondaries are fluid biomarkers, the CSF SOD1 protein levels, and the plasma neurofilament levels. And then a key exploratory endpoint, the ALS Assessment Questionnaire 5, a quality of life measures. We divided this into fast progressing and slow progressing groups. So these were subgroups. So for the fast progressing, historically an SOD1 mutation that moves quickly, or the participant themselves with another SOD1 mutation, but moving quickly with a loss of 0.9 points per month on the ALS functional rating scale. The slower group was those with any other SOD1 mutation but not progressing quickly. And then there was a pre-specified disease progression subgroup as well, which was using the baseline plasma neurofilament, above being more rapidly progressive and below being the slowly progressive. And I'll show you the data analyzed both ways. These are the baseline characteristics. These tables are, of course, are always challenging to digest quickly. Overall, the groups were relatively well matched on riluzole use, edaravone use, time from symptom onset, the plasma neurofilament levels, the pre-randomization slopes, and the percent breathing at baseline. So this is the results of the primary endpoint. Let me orient you to several of these slides. So in faster progressing, and let me see if I can, I'm looking for my pointer. That's okay, I think you can see this. The faster progressing is in red and the slower progressing in blue. Those that are treated are in the solid line, shown here, and the placebo is in the dashed line. There's an arrow here for several of the slides showing that worsening is going this way. And then this is the parent Valor study, and then the Valor study plus the open label with the dashed line here indicating the end of the Valor study, and then the open label extension. And you'll see the first point to make is that on the primary endpoint of the change in the ALS functional rating scale, this study did not meet the primary endpoint. There was no statistically significant difference here between these two lines. What you'll notice as I go through these data are a couple of other points. One is that the group that is defined as slow progressing overall does not progress much when treated with a drug initially, so that's this blue line here. And about 12 weeks into the open label, the group that are slow progressors have some apparent stabilization. So they show less progression after that point. You also see in the open label some increased separation between those initially treated with Tofersen and those initially treated with placebo. Okay, so the target engagement, the CSF protein levels of SOD1. So here is shown the placebo compared to those that are treated. And you see after about 8 to 12 weeks that SOD1 level, protein levels fall, 29% in the fast group, 40% in the slower group. And this fall in the protein is what we would expect. The time that it takes since the drug lowers mRNA levels, and then the protein falls according to the protein half-life, which is approximately 30 days. You see those initially treated with placebo also have their SOD1 levels come down. So neurofilament, as many or perhaps all of you know, is a nonspecific marker of neurodegenerative disease that leaks out from neurons and increases in the cerebrospinal fluid and also in the plasma in patients with ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases. What we see here is that with treatment with the Tofersen in both of the groups, that the neurofilament levels come down. You can see in the open label, those initially on placebo, that their neurofilament levels also come down, though not quite to the same level as those originally treated with Tofersen. The slow vital capacity was the respiratory measure here. You see similar effects to what I showed you before, is that those initially treated in the slow group with Tofersen are relatively stable and then may stabilize after being treated in the open label extension. There is a difference, not statistically significant, between Tofersen and placebo, and this difference increases in the setting of the open label extension with longer treatment. Muscle strength is measured by handheld dynamometry. It shows a similar pattern with a greater separation in the open label extension for those that are treated initially. This is the ALS assessment questionnaire. I'll note that worsening is now this way on these graphs. And you see a similar trend, those initially treated with Tofersen doing slightly better than those on placebo, and this difference widens in the open label extension. So time to event analysis. So the median time to death and the time to death of permanent ventilation were not able to be estimated because of the low number of events. So we include here a post hoc analysis that we performed to account for withdrawal due to disease progression. And so now you can see all of the events here in those with the early start of Tofersen versus the delayed start, including open label. And there are fewer events in the Valor group, and this is shown here as well. So I want to discuss enrichment markers. So if you look at the pre-randomization slope shown here on the x-axis compared to the ALS functional rating scale shown here on y, that there is some correlation, but the correlation is not very good. If you then swap out this x-axis with the baseline plasma neurofilament, keeping the same y-axis, you see a better correlation, suggesting that the baseline plasma neurofilament does better at predicting a future outcome than the pre-randomization ALS functional rating scale. So we've now redefined the groups as those above and below the median neurofilament. This was a pre-specified analysis. So now faster is above the median neurofilament, still in red. Slower is below the median neurofilament in blue. Same set of data shown with this analysis. And you see the same trends that I showed you before, with greater separation of Tofersen versus placebo in the open label extension and some stabilization of those in the slower progressing group. This is on respiratory function, the similar trend. Again, those initially treated with Tofersen and rapid progressive versus slowly progressive. Same trends again with the muscle strength as measured by handheld dynamometry. You can see greater separation in the open label extension. This is the ALS Assessment Questionnaire 5, looking at, again, Valor plus the open label extension, placebo, and treated. Again, worsening is in the opposite direction on this graph. Time to event analysis, as I mentioned before, the median time to death and time to death of permanent ventilation were not able to be estimated because of the low number of events. And we did a post hoc analysis to account for withdrawal due to disease progression. Fewer events in the early start on Tofersen, and that is shown here. So what about survival? So wanted to look at those with A4V or A5V in the newer nomenclature. This accounts for approximately 50% of the SOD1 mutations in the United States and is well known to be a rapidly progressive subset or rapidly progressive mutation. And this is from a number of studies showing that overall, the survival of this group is a median disease duration of 1.2 years. There are a few reports of those living longer than 3 years, single individuals in these studies. So what does this look like in this study? Excuse me. The first point to make is that this is the 1.2 year mark here. These are the A4V carriers. In green are those initially treated on placebo, and then here is the Tofersen treatment. These in the dashed lines are those that are still in the study as of July 2021, which is when this data cut was done. I'll also mention that PD is withdrawn due to disease progression. And what you can see is that the median disease duration is now 1.5 years in this group compared to 1.2 years in these natural history studies. Nearly all the subjects had at least one treatment emergent adverse event. Most of the events were mild or moderate in severity. The events were consistent with disease progression or the lumbar puncture procedure to deliver the drug intrathecally. Procedural pain, headache, pain in the extremities, back pain were some of the things that were seen in this group. And the safety profile was similar in the open label compared to Valor. There were several participants in the Tofersen group with serious neurologic events, and these serious neurologic events are shown here. There were no similar events in the placebo group. The myelitis with sensory motor deficits was monitorable and reversible. The other point about safety was that many in the Tofersen group had treatment emergent CSF abnormalities. Most of these were not reported as adverse events. They're shown here. There were some shift to high leukocytes in the placebo, but far more in the tofersen treated. There is some shift to high protein in the placebo, but again, far more in the tofersen group. These are events that we continue to monitor carefully. So in summary, the Valor study did not achieve statistical significance on the primary endpoint of the ALS functional rating scale at 6 months. However, I do think there is a clinical signal here that is seen across the secondary and exploratory clinical outcome measures. The effects are more apparent with longer-term follow-up in the extension, since earlier initiation led to a slowing of decline in the faster progressing participants, easier to see in the open label, and an apparent stabilization of clinical function in the slower progressing participants. Tofersen administration led to sustained reductions in the CSF SOD1 protein, demonstrating a clear target engagement. And there was also substantial lowering of the plasma neurofilament level, and this may suggest a slowing in neuronal degeneration. Most of the adverse events were mild, were moderate in severity, and most were consistent with ALS disease progression or LP-related events. There were, however, some serious neurologic events, including myelitis, that were seen in the tofersen treated participants. Want to thank the study participants and their caregivers. This study was involved, really a huge lift for the participants, and without them, the study, of course, would not have gone. Similarly, for the site staff, this was a complicated, very involved study over several years. I want to thank the investigators, is shown here, and the site staff. I also want to recognize the study steering committee, as shown here, including several people that are on this Zoom meeting this morning, and the entire community. We've had input from many of you along the way, listed all of the organizations here that have supported this work, and I look forward to taking questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. I am hoping there are questions. I think there's one already in the Q&A section. Please type in your questions. I'm monitoring that. I'm taking the prerogative of the person who is chairing the session, Tim, and asking you the first question. Okay. And you can answer in any politically correct way you want. When you look at the difference, because I'm quite struck by the neurofilament results, as you know, and secondarily quite struck by the non-fast progressing group, which reflects what I've been seeing. In retrospect, and maybe not in retrospect, maybe these are being planned. Are there any further statistical analyses that you would like to do on the groups with this ALS-FRS not moving as quickly as we would have liked to have seen? Because I think the pre-specified analysis focused on the fast progressing group, if I remember.
Yes, so you're absolutely correct. The pre-specified analysis, the primary endpoint was on the fast progressing group, right? And I hope that I appropriately called that out. So yes, it was specified there, not on the slow progressors. And as you know, the slow progressors are a tricky group to measure well. One could make the argument that you have a small number of slow progressors that didn't progress initially, but that may be consistent with the natural history in some of those people. So we're looking at ways to analyze that, though that's challenging, I guess is what I would say. Visually, I also agree with you. It's striking, and I think that if you look at those initially on placebo that are then treated, there also seems to be some apparent stabilization there. So I think we have to, again, these are early days with these data. Really pleased to be able to show the data, but I want to be clear. Of course, we continue to analyze the data. I mean, the other thing that we don't have as much information on, as you know, Angela, is the withdrawal due to disease progression is not the same thing as survival, and we hope that those data will be coming over the next several months as we learn from investigators what the survival was of the participants in the study. So
one more question, then I'm going to give you Andy's question. how do you look at the placebo arm and the fast progressing group? Because from my understanding, they did better than that was expected from our phase 2A study, the placebo arm.
They clearly did better in this study than they did in the phase 2 study. That's clear. There were not as many rapid progressors in the phase 2, and each of them, it has a variable course. So I think we have to. But yes, they did better than expected, I guess would be the other way to say that. They did better than we anticipated.
Okay, so I will leave you the pain of commenting on the ALS-FRSR, and I'll give you Andy's question. His question is really, how big an effect was the trial powered to detect? It seems more an underpowered trial than a trial of an ineffective drug. From Andy Wolf.
Yeah, so I'll agree that the numbers are low. We knew that we'd end up with a low N here, and then of course did power it for a large effect. I don't have the number in front of me in terms of the exact number in terms of our power calculations, but of course it was large. Otherwise, how would we get there? I believe that it was a 20-point difference, so a large difference.
Okay. Good. I'm going to just go through the questions, Tim. Mona asks, how many years do you think there'll be a breakthrough before there's a breakthrough in ALS clinical trials? You can.
Well, I would say that there's. I would say that there's breakthroughs all the time in ALS clinical trials, and though I think we're still learning how to interpret and understand the current data set from Tofersen. There's a lot more information to be gained, and the first thing to say is, we missed the primary endpoint, so I want to acknowledge that up front. Do I consider these data a breakthrough? Yes, I do. Is that all clear right now? No, it's not. So it's an opinion, and we will continue to analyze and think about these data. But then there are other breakthroughs all the time. I mean, I think the innovation of the platform trial is a major breakthrough for ALS clinical trials. And then there are some positive drugs moving forward, including Amylyx and likely others coming through. So I see, and then the science is just continuing to be wowing. And then the toolkit that we have to consider targeting antisense oligonucleotides is my favorite one, but it's but one of the fancy ways that we can target genes in the brain and spinal cord. Anyway, so I think it's on. I think it's ongoing. I think that maybe the question is when will we have something with a major influence, stop ALS in its tracks? I don't know. I think there's the potential. We have good shots on goal coming all the time now, and I think there's the potential out there, probably even now. I don't know when that will come.
So a caveat to your last statement, and then I'm going to Michael Benatar's question. The slow progressing group that's been treated from the beginning in the Valor study, that based on what we're seeing in the graphs, there's the time to event it's a flat line. My interpretation of the way it's presented is they're not progressing. Could that be our first clue that we are close to achieving that in a small group of patients?
I appreciate and of course share that positive outlook, Angela, but I think we just need to continue to interpret the data as best we can and be cautious about any overinterpretations at this point. I do agree with you that the lack of progression in the slow progressive group is visually striking, but we need to continue to think about what that means and how strongly we can interpret those data. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
That's an excellent answer. Michael Benatar is asking, can you provide a breakdown of specific SOD1 mutations in the fast progressing group on active drug and placebo.
Yeah. Of course, as you know, Michael, all those data will be public and will be published. I don't have that breakdown for you this morning regarding the specific SOD1 mutation. So we of course know them, and all of that will be included as it was in the phase 2.
Excellent. Christoph has asked, was the edaravone treated subgroup balanced?
I think so. As I recall, in each of those measures, I went through it pretty carefully. I thought that it was relatively well balanced, not perfectly, but well balanced as were Riluzole. So I think so.
It wasn't a large group of patients, so that were on edaravone, I recall, Tim. Do you have that data yet?
Of which ones were on edaravone?
Yeah, the numbers overall.
Yes. I mean, I'm just pulling up it's a few, right? So, placebo versus edaravone in the fast progressing, 1 and 2, slow progressing, 2 and 4, but that's exactly what you'd expect in terms of the 2-to-1 randomization. So, in fact, edaravone was nearly perfectly balanced, and so was, I'm looking at Riluzole, so was Riluzole, 13 and 25 and 9 and 20. So yes, I guess the short answer is yes, they were very well balanced in terms of those two drugs.
So we really did maintain a solid baseline treatment environment in these groups of patients, which is actually going to be helpful long-term. Good. Ben is shifting to a question on the platform trials. Are there any other comments that you want to make on the Valor study and where we're going next, Tim? I know we're continuing it, but the open label extension continues. Do you have any further comments on you presented the same data in last month, but there's been a lot of discussion about this data, as you know, so.
Right. Yeah, so I really appreciate the discussion today and the opportunity to discuss with everyone. Two other quick points, which is, of course, there will be ongoing data that continue to emerge, and we will share as much as we can, as quickly as we can. Right. So, and I think Biogen's have been very good about sharing the data, and on that level, I'll mention that these data are available on the Biogen website. They're not. If you cannot find it quickly, just email me. You can also find it through the ALS Center website at WashU, where we then link to the Biogen site. So all the data are available for you to go through at your leisure and to look at the balancing groups. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer as many as I can. We will get out these data as quickly as possible. The other thing we do recognize for the the participants in the study, those who participated, those with SOD1 mutations, these are incredibly important data to get right and to think it through very carefully.
Super. So Ben has the last question for you, which is related to the Healy platform. And how do you think the Healy will contribute to finding treatments?
Right, and I saw it was also kind of, will it work for slow progressors as well, as I saw that coming through, Angela. So in terms of the Healy platform, I'm excited about the whole concept of platform, which is the ability, it allows us, as I think many or all of you know, to test multiple drugs in the same way. So the time to getting a drug in to be tested is it's just much faster. And we've already shown that this is true in terms of getting a number of new regimens going. So its ability to test the medications quickly, which is I think is what we need. Someone started, or second or third question was, when are we going to find a breakthrough? And the way we're going to find breakthrough is by testing multiple drugs. There's a number of these things seem like they could work, should work, right? So how are we going to find the one that works? The way we're going to find the one that works is by testing multiple drugs and spending several months getting a drug going rather than a year and a half to get up and running is going to be so important. Ben asked about slow progressors. I think every trial is challenged to find a drug that is effective in the slow progressors. My one comment, and again, this is data that are not yet fully put together and analyzed, is that maybe neurofilament or some biomarker change would be the way to look at an effect in slow progressors. It's hard to see the clinical effects, and you need very large groups in slow progressing participants in trials. Maybe a change in neurofilament or something else, maybe that is different for different groups, would be one way to tell if there's been an effect on the disease. I think my interpretation of a change in neurofilament is that slowing down neuronal degeneration. I think that's likely good in the setting of ALS, and that may be one way to think about slow progressors. But I think maybe Ben's overall point is, well, even within Healy platform or other studies, finding a way to slow down slow progressing ALS is hard. And
Yeah,
the last comment I'll make about that is, even though these people are labeled as slow progressors, they're progressing, and you saw that in the placebo group, in this Tofersen trial, they're still progressing, and they're picking up disability and picking up problems along the way. So even though they're slow progressing, they're still progressing, and we should focus on that group as well. It's not quite as tragic and awful, but it's still bad. So we should figure out how to treat that group too.
Tim, thank you so much for getting up early and joining us before everything else starts. I'm sure we will be talking about this data for a while longer, so I'm really looking forward to the rest of the discussion.